even though we sort of addressed this at the beginning, I think a lot of people still are coming up against policies that are created by maybe administrators or special education where they're not allowed to test children before a certain amount of time. So for example, someone named Beth says, we're still fighting the myth that students must be in the country 7 years before we can investigate whether they're special ed. And a slightly different approach, Jennifer says, our school psychologist insists that we can't determine if it's a language problem until the 3rd grade. So there are these very specific kind of arbitrary deadlines or timelines that are being put together, and so I would, I just wonder, how do you respond to those comments?
Yeah, so that is a myth, and it's, I think, comes about from what we know about how long it takes English language learners to develop academic English. And so while it's true that it takes students between 5 and 7, 8 years, we learned from the work of Jim Cummins early on and other colleagues. While it's true that it takes them that long to develop academic English, I think it's sort of that older model of waiting till they're proficient in English so we can test them in English, right? So then they're proficient in English, now we can test in English. But we really are moving away from that model, and we go back to this idea that the children who have challenges that may be due to some intrinsic, or neurological or special education need are really already in our population. They're already in our school, and so again, it's a great disservice to miss these opportunities to proactively support these children early on. And I think this notion of culturally and linguistically responsive RTI or MTSS gives us permission to not the idea of when do we test, but this notion of when do we support and how do we support and how do we assess early on. So this notion of really enriching what's called like tier 1, so the classroom environment. How do we enrich that environment, make it more culturally linguistically responsive, use ESL, bilingual pedagogy in the classroom, so that most of the needs of most English language learners' needs will be met there. But then there are a small percentage of children who will need other support. So then again, proactively you can have small group instruction that's ELL appropriate in the classroom, but targeting those students who are having a little bit more challenge than other students. You're still not in special education, but you're providing student support. And this process is really fluid because they may have what they need so that they don't even need the small group instruction anymore. They have the resources and the situation was resolved. But then there are other students, and there are a handful of students, maybe 3 to 5% of students, that even with a rich learning environment in their classroom, even with small group instruction, even with sort of one-on-one or very small group instruction and support, those students may still not make the progress that you would expect compared to their like peers. And so it's of those students that you then can go on to further assessment and explore if it is in fact maybe not just English language learning needs, where you want to continue to support them, but additionally they may also have special education needs. But what this allows us to do is we don't, again, wait for them to have to fail or to have such difficulties that it's very difficult. The question is, when do we support? When do we intervene and support? Well, as soon as or before there are difficulties, right? So that's that notion. I'm describing 3 tiers of support, but there are systems in the United States where it's 7 tiers of support, right? And the process is, how to make the whole system more culturally linguistically responsive. And so I worry when it's this notion of waiting. While we don't want to over-identify students immediately that they're having challenges, we go to special education. But I worry about students who have challenges, who have anxiety, who have language expressive difficulties, who have reading difficulties, who have these intrinsic difficulties. And we need to support them early on and in a way that is culturally linguistically appropriate for them as early as possible. But I think this, if RTI and MTSS is done in a culturally linguistically responsive way, you can support those students early on, and then I think find the kids who are also have special education needs a lot sooner, I think.